This is Tamsen, Granger.
This is Dan Abuhoff.
With Tamsen and Dan read the paper on Sunday, March 31st, 2019. We're in the midst of March Madness.
We are.
And Daniel is a bit down in the dumps.
For the last game.
But we'll talk more about basketball in a few minutes. It's been another fun weekend. It started out with a bang in Manhattan.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because I was at the Met with my students.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those days when I meet students in New York City at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And it was pretty fun. Pretty exhausting, but pretty fun. And one of the highlights was an exhibition of the illustrations of an old Japanese novel, Tales of the Genji. I'm not good at Japanese. Anyway, written in the 11th century by a noblewoman. Original copy lost, but this was illustrations from various copies throughout the subsequent almost 1,000 years.
Really?
And beautiful scrolls and calligraphy. And it turns out I'm in love with an illustrator, a Japanese illustrator from the late 16th, early 17th century, Tosa Mitsuyoshi.
Okay.
Beautiful things. So, that's the reason you go to the Met, right? Not just to see the old beloveds and visit old friends that you've loved for years, this, that, and the other thing, but to find, serendipitously, new things you never thought of loving. And I accidentally went to the Asian wing and accidentally stepped into this exhibition and fell in love. So that was fun. The students were great, and they put up with my dragging them hither and yon in the museum. And I hope they had a good time.
I'm sure they did.
And then also on the weekend,
there's more?
We had a delightful lunch at the Love and Oven in Frenchtown, didn't we?
Yes.
It's our thing to go out for a nice breakfast and then have a walk on the canal path or something. And we did well. Love and Oven.
Okay.
Kimchi fried rice.
Yes, that's the new thing.
And a nice little eggs and bacon with sweet potato biscuit. Wow. And the coffee's good.
All right, good. I didn't realize you were so excited about that. Good.
Well, I like it when brunch goes well. I've had a lot of mediocre brunches in my life, but I like the combo here. We find a couple of good places we like right next to excellent walking spots.
Okay.
So we can walk it off. The no guilt brunch.
The no guilt brunch. Okay, well, we'll mention other places when we go there. Right?
Right.
Okay. So, let's get back to basketball because it's hard to get that off our minds. The NCAA tournament, we're in the throes of it now. We're not going to give you, the latest developments because this is not going to be heard for a few days.
Oh, why not?
No, let's not. But
Auburn just won.
Oh, please.
And
disturbing.
You had Kentucky.
I had Kentucky. It doesn't make any sense.
But I was rooting for Auburn.
No, don't tell me that.
I was.
But
because I like Charles Barkley.
Yeah. So he did go to Auburn. We should tell people he was in college, nicknamed the Round Mound of Rebound, which goes to his weight. So last night's game was an eye-opening game, which we did have the right team. Virginia played Purdue and beat Purdue. And in what was kind of an amazing game that went to overtime, as did the Auburn game. But it was
my mother was telling me about it.
Exactly, such a riveting game. What did your mother say? You were on the phone.
She said it was very exciting. It was back and forth and back and forth.
What did she say when you told her that you had gone to sleep with a few minutes to go?
She didn't seem to believe me.
Yes,
and she kind of glided over that.
She said no one left their seats.
That's right.
That's word for word what she said. No one left their seats, and she was right about her
Well,
son-in-law.
I left my seat.
Well, I didn't leave mine.
Well, I was conflicted. You wanted Virginia to win.
Forget who you wanted to win.
Financial reasons.
It was a riveting game.
And
it was a riveting game.
Since my brother went to Purdue, the Granger family was looking for Purdue.
Let me make a couple of points about this because we have to set something straight. Number one, all you've heard, not all, people keep hearing about Duke. Duke's very good. I'm with that. Zion Williamson, the great player. Okay.
How come they just keep winning by a smidge?
Well, number one, Duke has been winning but disappointing because you can't be the greatest team of all time and keep winning by 1 point in the last second. You're on to that. Very good.
Although it makes for exciting television.
But you don't look like a great team, number one. Number two, Zion Williamson is not the second coming of anything, honestly. They're certainly not the second coming of LeBron James. He's not.
I like that name, Zion.
It's a great name. I think it's helping him PR-wise. He's not even the best guy on that team. The best guy on that team is a fellow named R.J. Barrett.
R.J. Barrett?
That's right. But the best person in the tournament is neither of them. Up to this point, it is this fellow named Carson Edwards, who played with Purdue last night. Purdue did not belong in that game. They didn't have competitive personnel with Virginia, who's close to the number one team in the country. Carson Edwards notwithstanding. Carson Edwards scored 42 points. Let me put that in perspective for you. The rest of his team scored 37 points.
So that's bad behavior? And that's, in your mind, cheating if you win just because you have one good guy?
No, that's my point. Well, what I'm saying is Carson Edwards has been the best player in the tournament. If you score 42 points in a game like that, when before the game the other team knows you're the only good guy on their team and the only guy they have to stop in Purdue, and he scores 42, which in a pro game is like scoring 50 or 55 because the game's longer and there's more scoring.
Yeah.
It's incredible. And after the game, when they were talking about it, and Charles Barkley, your buddy, was saying, this doesn't make any sense. How could Virginia let this guy score 42 points? He's the only guy they have to stop. They can put every player on him, and they almost did. But he was taking such long shots that you couldn't cover him. They were taking two dribbles.
I'm confused. So do we not like Virginia?
It's not a matter of what do I like. No. It's not. This has nothing to do with what I like. I'm telling you the best player of the tournament it's Carson Edwards, or it has been. And
so Virginia has the worst coach?
No.
I mean,
where
are we going here?
I'm talking about Carson Edwards. Focus. Okay.
All right.
On Purdue.
Okay.
All right. Talking about one thing at a time. Now, in terms...
See, men can't multitask.
No, I can. But I can also single task. That's the amazing thing. So if we're going to talk about multitasking, just to finish one thing, let me go over one thing that's... your mother is impressing me with her ability to follow the games, but I'm not sure if you got this play because they didn't even explain it on television correctly. The way that game turned last night was that Virginia was going to lose the game to Purdue. Virginia was down by 2 points.
Right.
Excuse me, by 3 points. By 2
Okay.
points. By 3 points with 5 seconds to go.
Okay.
And Virginia was at the foul line to shoot 2. So if they make both shots, that's nice, but they lose the game by a point. And the ball goes over to the other team. They lose.
Dang.
So they have to do something.
Okay.
So they make the first shot. Now they're down by 2. And in the next play, the shot is missed. And the rebound goes back to Virginia. And they throw the ball, from almost the full court to a fellow who's near the basket, shoots at the buzzer, puts it in, ties the game. In other words, they pull the victory from the jaws of defeat. How did they do it? After the game, they were talking about it. Kenny Smith was saying to Barkley, the two commentators, people practice that tap-back play all the time. It's not about the tap-back play. He missed the shot on purpose. Maybe Smith is saying this. He missed the shot on purpose to give the kind of rebound they needed to get the rebound to take the other shot.
To the cherry picker.
Exactly. Crazy. Okay. A crazy play, and that's what got him to get going. So,
of course, they could have thrown it to him standing outside the three-point line.
No.
It would have won.
It's sounding like you're not even following. Yes, if he had made a three-pointer.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
It's almost like you're not listening.
I try. You're right. But, it's hard to make those long shots. You're right. A long shot would have won the game right there. Oh, you're your mother's daughter. What can I say?
Always thinking.
Yeah.
Always thinking.
All right. So the basketball is driving us crazy. But go ahead. So you, on the other hand, not in any way affected by this. You are...
That's it about basketball?
Yeah.
You still picking Duke to win?
Yeah. I don't know. Duke or Virginia. I can't even talk about it. Go on. I'm too overwhelmed. I'm too overwhelmed.
No, well, you think you're overwhelmed.
Yeah.
How do you think the Louvre at Abu Dhabi is feeling these days?
Yeah.
We talked a while ago about a Leonardo painting of Salvator Mundi that sold. One of those mysterious Leonardos that's rediscovered over the last few years. Sold in the 50s for like $1,000. Then recently in 2014 sold for $75 million, and then in 2017 sold for $450 million to a Saudi prince.
Yes.
With the idea that it would be on display in the Louvre, Abu Dhabi. And that's what puts your museum on the map. That's what makes people want to come to your museum when you have a Leonardo, especially one that notorious at the moment. And it was supposed to be on display as of September 2018. Not there. Not showing up.
What do you mean not there? How could it not be there?
It had... No one knows where it is.
This is like one of those television shows we're watching.
It was sold, and then it went to a conservator who, I don't know, who was supposed to go to a conservator.
Yeah.
And never got there. And the appointment was canceled. And he doesn't know anything about it. And nobody knows, nobody is saying
let me tell you
where
right
the
now,
heck it is.
This sounds like an episode from Whiskey Cavalier, that crazy show we're watching on Wednesday night.
That's a terrible show. Let's not even talk about it. It's embarrassing that you're letting people we've watched that. But the idea is now people are getting nervous. Remember there was a controversy. Is it a real Leonardo?
Right.
Or not? And so now does somebody have more proof that it's not a Leonardo? Is there egg on everybody's face? What is the deal? Or is this just, more publicity can never hurt situation? But anyway, front page of the New York Times, missing Leonardo. The last time that happened? In the 1930s when the Mona Lisa was stolen.
Really?
And you know what happened to the Mona Lisa. She's the most famous painting in the universe.
Yeah, but know what has to happen first? They have to find the painting. Right?
No, you have to have a lot of press.
Well, you got to get.
Then you find the painting.
Then you find. But you do.
People will be dying to see.
But you do have to find the painting. They haven't found the painting yet.
One step at a time.
All right. It's all about PR. That's
look around. Look around.
It might be underneath something. Any painting you have, scrape off the veneer. It could be a Leonardo underneath. Okay, so the baseball season started. There's a sport that makes some more sense, as opposed to watching these teenagers run around in college basketball. These are seasoned veterans, the baseball season. And the Times actually did a very nice job, I thought, summarizing sort of briefly what things look like in the various leagues. And
wait. You're saying something nice about
the Times
sports
I like
writing?
to do that. It's the exception that proves the rule. Okay? The exception that proves the rule. And they had, the Times, I think correctly, has identified Houston as the team to beat in the American League, although, of course, there's going to be Boston and there's going to be the Yankees who are going to be competitive. In the Times write-up, they do focus a lot, and I think it tells you something. In their analysis of the teams, it kept coming back to pitching. The league goes back and forth with hitting and pitching. It's all about starting pitching, and, of course, they like Houston starting pitching. That's why they like them. They like Boston's, and that's where the Yankees fall short, and that's where I think the Yankees are going to fall short. But other teams are kind of up and down in terms of what kind of pitching they have. But slight edge to the Houston Astros. In the National League, the Dodgers are miles ahead of everybody else. And in case you haven't noticed while you've been following at home, the Dodgers have been in the last two World Series representing the National League. They haven't won, but they have been dominating the National League. And it looks like they're going to dominate the National League again. There seems to be no team that's really been in a position to challenge them. Strangely, the team that's won as many games as anyone over the last 4 or 5 seasons is the Chicago Cubs. But the Chicago Cubs have been slightly dysfunctional over the last year or two, and word is that if the Cubs don't win it this year, they're going to fire their manager, Joe Madden, which is unbelievable because just a couple of years ago, he was the greatest manager of all time.
Wow.
So the Dodgers look they have a tremendous edge. So there's a lot of statistics here. I'm not going to bore you with statistics. I know the numbers can get a little dull. But there's one statistic that just floored me. And it's more of a statistical oddity. But let's see what kind of reaction I get from Miss Granger here. Okay? The person who led the league in home runs last year in the American League was a player named Chris Davis, okay, who plays for the Oakland Athletics. All right, someone's going to lead in home runs. He had 42 home runs. That's very good. He's a very good hitter. But here's what's amazing about him. Over the last 4 seasons, he has hit 247. That, I'm not saying in the aggregate. Every single year he hits 247, the exact percentage.
Okay.
You know what the odds are against that? It's like 1,000,000,000 to 1.
Okay.
Because that's a percentage based on all his hits, all his bats. Every year it comes out exactly the same. That's almost impossible.
And that's the excitement?
Isn't that something?
Not that it's too high or too low.
No,
it's just
it's
the same.
It's a statistical oddity. The great thing about sports, about baseball in particular, it's all about the numbers. Hitting 247 4 years in a row is unreal. Okay. I see you want to think about that.
And that's why you like the article.
That's why I like the article.
All right. And it's not because they said anything nice about the Mets.
I'm going to come back to the Mets later.
Okay.
I will speak about the Mets later.
I know there is so much to speak about.
Well, the Mets have an interesting team, and I'm going to talk in particular about the Mets and their history in the latter part of the podcast. You can look forward to that.
So here's a weird story.
Yes.
From the New York Times this past week. The Dog Suicide Bridge, a Gothic mystery in Gothic stone.
Yes.
And it's about a bridge in Scotland, in Dumbarton, Scotland, where there have been many instances of dogs who are walking across the bridge with their owners, suddenly seem to see something, they stop, they stare, and then they leap over the side of the bridge, often not surviving it, but sometimes surviving. And nobody can figure out why. And there are many stories. Maybe, animal behavior people, etc., say, well, they smell...
Mink. Right.
Animals,
right?
Nests of minks and other animals, and they're so overcome by desire for a bite, I guess, they head that way. Or some people say they're not really trying to leap off the bridge; they're trying to leap up on the railing, which is quite wide, but it's angled, so they slip off and slide in. Other people seem to feel it's a ghost. And it's the ghost, the widow who lived in the manor house nearby. It's
not the ghost of
she was so overcome by grief, she still roams around, apparently. But it is odd. There are all kinds of estimates about how many dogs. Some people say 500, some people say 300, some say very many.
Hundreds of dogs killing? I mean...
Hundreds of dogs leaping in over the side.
I mean, you might say, well, the logical thing is going to be some sniff of an animal, some scent of a mink. But there are a lot of minks, there are a lot of scents, and there are a lot of dogs getting killed, generally speaking.
There are a lot of people going over bridges.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, this is bizarre.
It is very bizarre. So stay tuned. Maybe there'll be future developments.
So there's no solution. The Times is on it, though, right?
Well, I think you got to keep your dog on a leash.
Well, in Scotland.
Yeah. Maybe they don't do that.
Yeah, maybe. That is part of the problem, I bet. I think leashes is the next thing.
I think a lot of people walk their dogs off leash. In fact, we were in Central Park this week.
They're off the leash until 8 in the morning.
And all the dogs were running all about. None of them leaping off overpasses.
Right. Now, they have all they can do to catch up the tennis balls.
How many minks are in Central Park anyway? Well, maybe not enough.
Maybe not enough.
Okay, restaurants.
Restaurants, yes.
So, an op-ed piece by Frank Bruni.
Mm-hmm.
What's the best restaurant if you're over 50? And Frank Bruni's an interesting guy. He has been the restaurant critic.
Right, he was.
For the Times.
He's been writing general op-ed for the last few years.
Yeah.
But before that, he was just a food guy.
He's a pretty complex guy.
He might be.
He wrote an interesting piece. I don't know if I talked about it on the podcast.
Yeah.
A long personal essay because he actually lost the sight in his right eye.
Mm-hmm.
He woke up one morning and turns out he had had a stroke, so to speak, in his eye.
Mm.
And suddenly didn't have the sight. And he's coming to grips dealing with that.
Uh-huh.
And it was an interesting essay.
Well, I thought he was a very good food writer. As an op-ed writer, not as good. But what is he writing about?
This personal essay was very good. Anyway, so back to what restaurants you go to.
Yeah.
And he's detailing a couple years ago getting invited to an opening of the latest, greatest, cool place in Washington. And he comes out of it just not that thrilled.
Right.
And it's got all the bells and whistles, everything you're looking for. The world is thrilled, and he's not. And he says, you know what you're really looking for at this point is actually comfort and quiet and the people you know and love. And he talks to a variety of people over 50. And he says, it turns out it's not just your body that changes. It's not just your sex life that changes. Your restaurant taste changes over 50 as well. And he talks to people including, Mo Rocca.
Yeah, I know who he is.
And he's an actor, TV journalist, host of a podcast, etc. You hear him. And he says, actually, he likes to be in a place that is quiet, more like a library than a restaurant. In fact, if somebody said to him, they're serving food in the library, he'd be the first to go.
Right.
Ina Garten, or Ina, I should say, Ina Garten, and her husband. Where do they like to go? She says people are always, saying, what's, the latest, greatest place? And she doesn't know. Because they find a place they like, they go there all the time.
So they go there.
And they will go there for years and then move on to a new place.
Right.
And she will try new places occasionally.
Right.
And that may become the place. But she also agrees you're really looking for a place where you are welcome, where you are known, where you are treated well. And Danny Meyer, the famous restaurateur, says that James Beard was famous for saying, when people ask him, what's your favorite restaurant? He said, it's just, it's pretty much your favorite restaurant, the place where they love you the most.
Well, I think, I wouldn't quite apply it that way. But what I would say is that you want a welcoming place. You want a place with very good service that's very mindful of the customer. And obviously, if you find that, you're going to keep coming back and get even more comfortable, and that makes it your go-to place, and that's fine.
We have friends who love to go to restaurants and rarely go to the same restaurant again. They very often, I think you might have the taste for, that was a great meal, but where's the next great meal? It's not going to be as much fun because we already know it.
Well, I'm not saying no one has that point of view, but in terms of the point of view that these folks have, and I think we have too, is you want to be a place where you're made comfortable. And now, obviously we go to Deanna's. We like Deanna's a lot, and the service is wonderful, and Armand is the bartender, and we like the food, so we recommend that. But in terms of going new places, we went to a new place last week, which is this very fancy place. Milos.
Greek fish restaurant.
Right.
On West 55th Street.
Right.
And you had recently read an article about the restaurateur.
Right. And he was a very interesting guy, very modest beginnings. And he
Greek, worked his way up from nothing.
Right. Established his business in Canada, which he found very welcoming as opposed to the United States. But had a couple of restaurants which looked like nothing, but his big thing is he wanted Greek food, authentic food, and the freshest possible fish. He had a single-minded focus on quality. He developed a following there, and it extended to the United States. And he has this place near City Center, which is on 55th Street between 5th and 6th. And it is not a cheap restaurant, not inexpensive. It's very expensive.
Let's say we frequently go to City Center.
And
we've been walking by Milos,
one day,
looking in.
One day.
No, we haven't even been saying one day. We've been saying, that's too fancy for us.
Right. And so we finally bit the bullet and went.
Because you were so charmed by this article.
Right.
And I did remind you that we've actually been there many, many years ago.
Well, I didn't remember. But in any event, but the real point is, number one, it's not a fancy place just to be fancy. It's a very nice place, but it is all about the fish. And they have all these fish from the Mediterranean, and they actually walk you to the display of all the fish that are nice, and you pick out your fish, and they tell you about your fish. And, you know, you're often sharing a fish. And it's very simple.
Not
fresh
with
fish,
another table. With
your
table.
I don't, who knows, but probably not. And they say that we want that fish. In our case, a balata. We'll grill it. It'll be for the two of you and fine. And we have some very simple Greek salad with that.
But they also had live scallops.
Right.
Like gigantic scallops.
They had an enormous seafood
shell.
display. There was no question about it. And it was very impressive. But on top of everything else, it had wonderful service. Okay.
They treated us like royalty.
They did.
And they treated us like family.
And it's the first time we'd ever been there.
We were not the fanciest people there.
No. Remember, most of the people seemed to be European. They were speaking languages that we had some trouble identifying.
Languages.
Right. And fine. But we were just simple Americans, and we were treated extremely well. We had a very nice meal.
Yeah.
So that's a place I would go back to.
Yes, but we'll save up.
We'll save up.
You know, it's funny because Bruni in his article mentions that he has just had a fantastic meal at one of the new places at
Hudson Yards?
Hudson Yards.
Yeah.
Thomas Keller's place.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you say tack...
no, but I know what he's talking about.
Tack room or TAK room, I don't know. But anyway, it's a steakhouse.
Yeah.
It's really old-time comfort food.
Right.
They have Oscar... Oysters Rockefeller.
That's
have
all time. Yeah.
The plateau, where you serve seafood, raw seafood on a tower.
But I'm sure that's very expensive.
They have fettuccine Alfredo.
Wow.
They have short rib, forest mushroom lasagna. But get this, the eggplant parm, $30.
Yeah.
The lamb chops,
well,
$75.
That's the story.
The roast chicken.
Yeah.
$68.
That's amazing.
And he says, so anyway, I mean, this is absolutely, it's not, a late-breaking, earth-shattering cuisine.
Yeah.
It's really, really comfort food.
Yeah.
And Bruni does say, if he could afford to, he'd go back there every week, like the gardens.
But it's too expensive. But listen, if you get a roast chicken $60, the chicken must have gone to college or something like that. I mean, that doesn't make any sense at all. But Hudson Yards is going to be a new thing. Milos, the place we went to, was opening a place in Hudson Yards. Everybody's running to Hudson Yards. We'll see.
But it's for a certain demographic. And I think this tack room must be for our over 50 demographic.
Yeah, yes,
looking
for
accessible, comfortable.
Yeah, well, it might be over 70. But yeah. Okay. Broadway shows. So we didn't see a show this week, but we have some that we're seeing coming up.
We've been reading about a lot of stuff.
Well, first of all, we're going to see, I think we're going to see on Wednesday, The Cradle Will Rock at the Classical Stage, CSC, Classic Stage Company. And that will be interesting. That's a show that was done in 1938. Orson Welles did it with his group, Mercury Theater. It's called A Play with Music. Sometimes it's performed as will be performed then just with piano. They have a very interesting cast. We'll give them a fuller report on that next weekend. But there are other things coming up, what would you like to talk about? You want to talk about Ain't Too Proud, or what would you like to speak of?
Well, Ain't Too Proud, the Temptations play, musical.
Yeah.
The biopic, as you like to call it,
yeah.
Got a terrific review.
Right.
And that has our buddy Jeremy Pope,
right.
who was the star of Choir Boy in it. Mm-hmm. So even though I don't believe in jukebox musicals, to me they're usually boring, this does sound pretty darn terrific. So maybe it would be fun to go to that. Mm-hmm. I don't know what you're thinking about that. Also, I was reading about Rachel Chavkin, who was the director of the Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812, which was a pretty fun musical we saw with the family, and that became the center of a whole lot of controversy in social media, etc. But anyway, I mean, it was a real up and down kind of situation. But anyway, she's in previews. She's the director of a show called Hadestown. And that is based on the ancient myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, and was, might be interesting. Anyway, she seems like an intriguing young talent 38 years old, still reeling from everything that happened with the Great Comet. But she says she has learned a lot. So, maybe that's...
Yeah, I'm not that excited about Hadestown. What I'm more excited about is the Lehman Brothers show. Is it called Lehman? You have the title right there.
The Lehman Trilogy.
The Lehman Trilogy, which takes place at the Park Avenue Armory, if I recall correctly.
Yes.
And what's fascinating about it is the story of these these Lehman Brothers who started out a long time ago in Europe trading commodities, and it goes on. The family goes on to all kinds of things, including eventually selling bonds. And of course,
at a certain point, they just have like a clothing store,
right? But it's a long. That's why it's a trilogy. It's a long story, but they end up a Wall Street powerhouse. And of course, the story of Lehman Brothers is that it went out of business in 2008. It was a huge financial catastrophe, almost brought down the entire financial system of the United States.
So it sounds like a tremendous bore to me.
No, it's fascinating, and not only is it fascinating,
it gets a critic's pick.
Well, it's at the Times.
Ben
But
Brantley
the point is that the amazing thing is it covers so many years, and there are so many characters and so much going on, and yet they only have 3 actors. It's 3 people on stage. It's Ben Miles, Adam Godley, Simon Russell Beale, 3 English actors. And they portray all these parts, and they stand there in the Armory in a fairly stark space, and they cover all this ground. And the Times says it's amazing, and I bet it is amazing.
Is it amazing, or is it just the Times wanting to be
We haven't
amazed?
seen it. No, it's not the Times wanting to be amazed.
So maybe we have to try to see that.
Yes, Park Avenue Armory. We've never done that.
We're having trouble getting off the schneid with some of these plays. We keep saying we want to see them, and then we don't get to them. So
one of us has to get to New York. But yes.
Oh. I was just in New York.
Yeah.
And then a big article in the Times Magazine section about Glenda Jackson, who is starring as King Lear.
Yeah.
And again, I would say the buzz is pretty good about that.
I don't know. We'll see. I mean,
but she's an interesting character.
Yes.
And remember, we went through her story before, talking about 3 Tall Women and how she, was a movie actress, theater actress, and then takes off for 23 years and is a member of Parliament.
Right.
And but she's interesting, and she is one of those women who doesn't take tea for nobody's fever.
Yeah, I don't know. It's your phrase. It's not mine.
She doesn't suffer fools gladly.
Yeah, she's kind of a tough 80-some-odd-year-old, and so that's the story. So we'll see.
Again, it sounds like an amazing interpretation, and the article is one of those articles that's saying, this is tremendously meaningful today. Yeah, we'll all be able to relate to this.
Let me come back to my point.
And here's something.
What?
Directed by Sam Gold.
Okay.
Which you should be interested in because Sam Gold directed the Encore's presentation of Cradle Will Rock.
Oh, really? But that was
in
the summer.
2013.
Well, but that doesn't mean much to me. But the deal is that, first of all, that was a full production with Patti LuPone. You couldn't mess with that. The thing was, and I should mention, you reminded me, Sam Mendes is the director of the Lehman Trilogy. I'll give a will see to the Glenda Jackson thing. The truth is, I think it's
You'll
kind of...
give a what?
Will see.
We'll see.
Yeah, because...
I thought you were giving it a gentleman's C.
No, that too. The point is, I'm not clamoring to see King Lear no matter who's performing it, honestly. That's a long play. That's a big deal. So... and
3 hours
yeah.
in the Park Avenue Armory.
Couldn't be better.
Talking about bonds.
Bonds. Maybe stocks. All right. So you had something about Italian handbags before we get back to the Mets.
Well, back to business.
Yes.
Interesting article in the Wall Street Journal on Saturday in the business section about Italian handbags.
Yeah.
Now, here's the deal. Handbags are super profitable.
Right.
Accessories generate a third of all revenue from personal luxury goods. Handbags in particular boast some of the industry's biggest profit margins since they are expensive, but they don't take up much space, and they don't have to come in different sizes. All right.
That's good.
Here's what was interesting to me. Handmade in Italy.
All right.
Okay, I get the feeling that everything is just coming out of random factories in third world countries. But no, people are still willing to pay for handmade in Italy from the big brands, Gucci and Prada and Burberry and, and all these great brands. They all come out of a little town, not so little, 50,000 people outside of Florence, Scandicci. And Scandicci has the manufacturers, has all these people with sewing machines making these handbags like crazy. Now, the brands are getting nervous because many of these businesses, the manufacturers, are old-time family-run businesses. And as you know, the younger set doesn't always want to continue in the family business. And it's in order to maintain the level of quality that they have, the brands like Gucci have been buying up the little businesses, its subcontractors. Gucci has bought 12 of its subcontractors over the last year and intends to buy 8 more. They just built a huge manufacturing space of its own, 37,000 square feet, and are planning to build more. And they're beginning to train people. They're also scaring the other manufacturers a little bit because they're luring away a lot of their trained personnel.
Yeah, but what's interesting is that, number one, the quality matters, and number two is that the craftsmanship that these folks have can't be replaced. And as a result, the handbag makers you're talking about are in demand.
And this is a bright light in the Italian economy.
All right.
Okay, good. That wages have been rising 10 to 15%. Generally Italy is pretty stagnant in terms of its economy.
It's surprise.
It's in a lot of trouble.
A surprise.
So it's really a very interesting situation, and these companies and the brands, the big brands, are working hard around the clock to train new workers. Another interesting thing about the photographs is totally anecdotal. But all the photographs they show of people working in these factories, women.
Okay.
Interesting. You think of factory work, you think of, men and...
Well, yeah. I mean, you might want to test that because those could just be the photographs. But
absolutely. I could be totally wrong about this. But it's interesting when you see, and they're all in white coats, quite but nice looking.
It's impressive. All right. So the Mets.
So so impressive.
No, that's wrong. So here's the deal. Number one is before we get the Mets of today, here's what's notable. And again, I have to credit the Times. It's the anniversary, the 50th anniversary of the Mets' amazing year, 1969, when they won the World Series. And the Mets had a special section on that. And there'll be some celebration during the Mets campaign this year of that team. Now, why is that amazing? Why it's amazing was the Mets were the doormat of the major leagues. They were introduced in 1962, and they didn't win their first game until their 10th game. They lost 120 games their first year. They were in last place every single year for the first 8 years or so, or 6 or 7 years. Then they were in second to last place, and then we got to 1969. So, and then things changed on a dime completely. And why did they change on a dime? Because they got a young kid named Tom Seaver. And Tom Seaver turned the team around. Now, you can't turn around a baseball team with one guy, but he changed the way people thought along with the manager, Gil Hodges, and they got a whole lot of pitching, and suddenly they went pretty much from worst to first, as they like to say. They got into 1969, and they started winning some games. And it was weird because the Mets were always a last place team. And by the way, I should tell you, the Yankees were a last place team too then. And the reporters started showing up in the Met game. And when they were 23 and 23, after they played their 46th game, they asked if they were going to open a bottle of champagne, if they were 500 this late in the season. And Seaver almost threw the reporters out of the clubhouse. Said, we're not here to be mediocre. I don't know what the heck is. This isn't the old Mets. This is my Mets.
So when you, in your infancy, watching the Mets during this year, did you know something big was happening?
Well, first of all, I wasn't in my infancy. I was 15 years old. And it was sort of prime time.
Seems like infancy now.
No.
Here.
And no, we were just kind of wide-eyed. It was the strangest thing of all time.
But you knew it was different.
There was no question this was different. And then Then something strange happened. In June, they had a big game against the Cubs, which were the league leading team. And in the critical game, Tom Seaver got on the mound to pitch. And he not only beat the Cubs, he had a perfect game in the 9th inning. They destroyed the Cubs. The game got broken up, but they won the game. And he was dominant. And from that point on, the Mets played like gangbusters. And let me give you an example why this was so weird. This was so weird. Let me just... In September, when they're in the middle of the pennant race, all right, they couldn't hit. Okay, the one thing Bill Hodges did was he platooned everybody. He platooned several positions, which was new then, but they still couldn't hit, but they could pitch. So they
Wait a minute, I don't even know what platooned everybody means.
They would play righties against left-handed pitchers and left-handed batting players against right-handed pitchers to give them an advantage because you can hit the opposite side.
And no one thought to do that before?
They didn't do it as much because the Mets had no stars. They just had one or two stars. They're mostly a defensive team. So they had a game in September in which Steve Carlton, the Hall of Fame pitcher, struck out 19 Mets. It set a record for most strikeouts in a game. The Mets, Ron Sabota, in addition to striking out twice, hit two two-run home runs. The Mets won the game 4-3. Struck out 19 times, won the game. In that same month, in September, the Mets had a doubleheader against Pittsburgh. They won both games 1-0. Okay, which is incredible. They scored 2 runs and won 2 games. Can't hit, but they can pitch. And
that means they have good defense.
Yes, and they have good defense. And Tom Seaver was aided by Jerry Koosman. They were the 2 pitchers on the team, and the 2 best pitchers. During the stretch run, the last 40 games, Koosman's record was 8-1. Seaver's record was 9-0. Okay, they just never gave up runs, and they raced right by the Cubs. And people were going crazy. They get to the playoffs. They play the Braves, all right? And what happens in that's the first one team to win 3 games. And the Mets had so many pitchers, it was unbelievable. The Mets win the first 2 games. They get to the 3rd game. The game is sort of tied. It's a critical moment in the 3rd inning. The Mets replace their pitcher. Rico Carty, who's a superstar for the Braves, comes up to hit. They ask him, he never heard of the pitcher who's coming in. They say, what does he throw? Fastballs? Someone says fastball, sliders. We don't know. Turns out the pitcher is Nolan Ryan. The Mets have Nolan Ryan on their bench. They bring him in the 3rd inning. Of course, Nolan Ryan was to become the Hall of Fame greatest fastball pitcher in the history of baseball. Guess what? He beats the Braves. They never saw him before. They never heard of him before. He couldn't break into the Mets rotation. This is what the Mets have on the bench. They beat the Braves. They get to the World Series. They beat the Orioles, who were a great team, and they win. And the town goes crazy in a way I've never seen any town go crazy over sports. I can say there were 3 things going on in New York and many other places in 1969. One was the moon landing during that summer. The other was Woodstock, the Festival of Love, the concert. And the 3rd was the Mets. And I'm not going to tell you the Mets was the biggest thing of those 3, but it wasn't the 3rd. All right? So it was just beyond. So here we are. The Mets are going to celebrate.
Wait a minute, can I just ask you, do you remember every game?
I remember the game Sabota hit the 2 home runs against Steve Carlton. I was listening to the game in my bedroom when I was supposed to be sleeping. Oh, yes, I remember it. So
were you under the covers with the transistor radio?
I don't want to get into graphic detail with under the covers. The fact of the matter is it's pretty close to the truth, and it was a pretty small radio. But here's the thing. So now what do you got? The Mets are here now with a new GM, Brody Von Wagenen, they describe, he's a guy who used to be an agent. He comes from outside the normal group of people who would be a general manager. And they call him the communicator-in-chief. He can't stop talking. And they told his story about when he said they asked him for an experience where he felt he talked too much. He said he was at Stanford. He played baseball. His girlfriend, who was to become his wife, was a diver at Stanford. He was invited to go to dinner with his girlfriend and her parents. And he sits down to dinner, and it turns out her parents, her mother is there with her new boyfriend, who's Neil Armstrong, who walked on the moon.
Okay.
Right? Well, they don't, he finds that a lot of silence. He talks the entire time. The entire 2 hours he's talking. He said he had diarrhea of the mouth. Every quiet period, he said, I filled it. And then when they got out of dinner, and then he got alone with Molly, his girlfriend. He said, well, did I screw that up? She said, oh, I forgot to tell you. Mom and Neil in particular, they don't talk too much. So, but here we are. Here we are. The symmetry is too great. You have Brody with Armstrong, the first man on the moon. Yeah. All right? In the here and now. Okay?
So you're saying...
We're recreating, we're revisiting the magic of 1969. All the stars are aligned. This is it. This is going to be the Mets year. They have the same pitching, or close to the same pitching they had then, with the top pitchers that they have, with Syndergaard and DeGrom. They don't hit that much, but they hit enough. I think, let's just say...
from your lips to God's ears.
Nothing's impossible.
All right,
you can't count them out.
On that note.
So we're looking forward to the baseball season.
Looking forward.
Yes.
All right. And I can't follow that, so I'll just have to say this is Tamsen Granger.
And Dan Abuhoff.
With Tamsen and Dan reading the paper again next week. Come on back.